Have you ever seen a man who owns everything except peace? That's where our story begins. In a mansion that kissed the clouds of Atlanta's skyline, behind iron gates and whispering pine trees, stood the home of Richard Donovan, a man who had turned ambition into empire. Richard wasn't born into wealth. He built it. From sleeping in a borrowed room during his college years to creating Donovan Industries, a technology giant that powered half of America's smart systems. He had earned every dollar through sleepless nights and relentless vision. Yet, in that vast ocean of success, his world revolved around one single island. His son, Caleb, was 13, bright, kind, and far wiser than most kids his age. He had that spark in his eyes, the kind that could make even the grumpiest people smile. He loved drawing rockets, reading about stars, and building little robots out of scrap metal. His favorite thing in the world was sitting in his father's office, waiting for Richard to come home. When the heavy doors would open, Caleb would spring up with excitement, shouting, "Dad! Guess what I made today?" Richard would laugh, scoop him up, and for a few moments, the billionaire became just a father. But one morning, everything changed. Caleb didn't wake up like usual. He wasn't running down the marble staircase, asking for pancakes, or joking with the chef. Instead, his nanny found him sitting by the window, shivering. His skin looked pale, and his lips had lost their color. He said he felt dizzy, like the world was spinning too fast. At first, everyone thought it was the flu. Richard had his private doctor flown in that same hour. The doctor examined Caleb, prescribed rest, and assured Richard it was nothing serious. But the next day, Caleb couldn't stand without trembling. By the third day, he could barely lift his spoon. And by the end of the week, he was lying in a hospital bed surrounded by machines that beeped softly, keeping time with his fading strength. The diagnosis came like a thunderclap. No amount of money could stop. A rare degenerative viral infection, attacking Caleb's nervous system, something so obscure. Even the most advanced hospitals had no cure. It had appeared in fewer than a dozen known cases worldwide, and not one patient had survived longer than 2 weeks after onset. "Mr. Donovan," said Dr. Harrington, the head of the medical team, his voice steady but heavy with regret, "we've done every test imaginable. We've tried antivirals, blood purification, plasma exchange, but the infection is spreading faster than his body can fight. I'm afraid your son has maybe a week left." Richard just stared. It felt like the walls closed in, like the air had vanished. A week? He could buy time on television. He could buy art, islands, entire companies, but not a single extra day with his boy? "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, you treat him. You call anyone you have to. I'll pay whatever it takes. Just fix him." Dr. Harrington looked down. "Sir, we've contacted every major research hospital. There's nothing left to try." Richard stood there, unmoving, as the doctor left. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to do. His billions couldn't solve this. His power meant nothing. His genius, useless. That night, he sat beside Caleb's hospital bed. The boy's small fingers were cold in his hand. Machines hummed around them, casting soft blue light on his son's sleeping face. Caleb stirred and opened his eyes weakly. "Dad? I'm here, buddy, always." "Am I dying?" Richard froze. Every part of him wanted to lie. But when he looked into those eyes, the same curious, trusting eyes that had once believed their father could fix anything, the truth broke him. "I won't let you," he said softly, voice trembling. "You hear me? I don't care what they say. I'll find a way." Caleb tried to smile. "It's okay, Dad, maybe." "It's not something you can fix." Richard turned away, tears burning his eyes. His own son, comforting him. It wasn't supposed to be this way. The following days blurred into sleepless nights. Richard spent hours on the phone with specialists across the world. Japan, Germany, Israel. even small experimental labs in Switzerland. But every answer was the same. There's nothing we can do. In his desperation, he authorized experimental treatments. None worked. Caleb's condition worsened. His breathing slowed. His skin grew colder. Reporters caught wind of the story. "Billionaire's son fights for life," headlines screamed. But Richard didn't care. Cameras waited outside the hospital gates, and still he stayed at Caleb's side, refusing to leave. One night, his ex-wife Laura came to visit. Their divorce had been bitter years ago, but grief stripped away old wounds. She stood beside him, her makeup streaked with tears. "Do you remember," she whispered, "how he used to say he'd be an astronaut? Said he wanted to see stars that no one else could see?" Richard nodded faintly. "He still will." "Richard," she said softly, "we have to accept it." He didn't reply. How could a father accept that? How could anyone? That night, when the nurses left, he placed his hand over Caleb's chest. He could feel the faint rhythm beneath his palm, fragile, fading, and for the first time in his adult life, Richard prayed. Not to a God of profit or progress, but to anyone who might listen. "Take my money," he whispered into the stillness. "Take my company. Take everything. Just give him life." Outside, thunder rolled across the city, but no voice answered. Richard didn't know it then, but somewhere across town, under the same cloudy sky, another boy, poor, hungry, and forgotten, was about to step unknowingly into his story. A boy who had nothing, yet would give everything. While Richard Donovan's mansion sat high above the city, on a hill of glass and gold, far below, down in the concrete veins of Atlanta, another life was being lived in shadows. His name was Jordan Miles, and at 14, he had already learned the kind of lessons most grown men never face in a lifetime. Every morning, he woke beneath the rusted overpass on Peachtree Street. His home, a torn blanket, a shopping cart filled with scavenged things, and a broken radio that sometimes caught faint bits of gospel music if you hit it hard enough. When the sun rose, he'd rub his hands together for warmth, take a deep breath, and whisper the same words his mother had taught him before she died. "Get up, baby. The world don't wait." His mother had been a cleaner, gentle, quiet, but strong in the kind of way poverty builds you. She'd passed from pneumonia when Jordan was 12. No relatives came. No one from the system followed up. After the funeral, he went back to the small apartment they'd shared, only to find the door padlocked for unpaid rent. That night, he slept outside for the first time. 2 years later, the streets had hardened him, but not his heart. He'd learned where to find leftover food behind diners, which gas stations let him fill his bottle, and which corners were safest to sleep. He wasn't proud, but he wasn't broken either. When people looked at him with pity, he'd flash a grin and say, "Don't worry, I'm just passing through." Most days, Jordan washed windshields at traffic lights. He'd carry a small spray bottle and an old rag, darting between cars when the light turned red. Some drivers smiled and tossed him $1. Others ignored him, eyes fixed forward like he didn't exist. The worst rolled up their windows when he approached, afraid that poverty might somehow be contagious. Still, Jordan never cursed them. He understood fear. It just wore different clothes depending on where you came from. One rainy afternoon, as cars splashed through puddles and thunder grumbled above, Jordan spotted an elderly man struggling to push a broken-down cart filled with scrap metal. The man's hands shook, and his clothes were soaked through. Without thinking, Jordan rushed over and helped him push the load under a nearby awning. "Thank you, son," the man wheezed. "Ain't many folks out here stop to help." Jordan smiled. "We all got days when we need a hand, right?" The man chuckled softly. "You got a good heart. Don't lose that. Streets'll try to take it." Jordan didn't know it. But that moment, that simple act of kindness, would echo back to him soon in ways he could never imagine. Every night, after scraping together a few coins, Jordan visited Miss Loretta's soup kitchen, a small brick building that glowed like a warm ember in the cold downtown streets. Miss Loretta was in her 60s, always wearing the same faded blue apron, her silver hair tied in a bun. She had fed half the city's forgotten souls for over 30 years. "Lord child, look at you," she said one evening, ladling stew into his bowl. Skinny as a broomstick. "You eaten enough?" "Trying to," Jordan said with a grin. "This right here keeps me alive, though," she smiled. "That and that smile of yours!" Jordan sat near the window, eating slowly, watching the streetlights blink. He liked it here. It felt safe, human. That night, 2 men sat at the next table, talking loud enough for everyone to hear. "You heard about that Donovan boy?" one said, shaking his head. "The billionaire's kid. Doctors say he's got maybe a week to live. Man, that's wild. All that money, and still can't stop death knocking. Makes you wonder what it's all worth." Jordan froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. He didn't know who the Donovan boy was, but something about it hit him deep. A kid, his age, dying, and his father, a billionaire, helpless. He couldn't explain why, but it sat heavy in his chest all night. When he crawled back under the overpass later, the city sounds faded into the background. Sirens, engines, and rain tapping against metal beams. He lay on his back, staring at the dark sky between the cracks of concrete. He whispered softly, "God, I don't know that boy. But if there's a way you can help him, do it. And if you can use me somehow, I ain't got much, but I'll do it." He didn't know that prayer had just been heard. The next morning, Jordan woke to the sound of footsteps. Not the usual rush of strangers, but someone deliberate, careful. He sat up, blinking in the sunlight. A man in a dark coat was standing near the bridge, handing out brown paper bags to the homeless. "Hey, young man," the man said. "You eaten yet?" Jordan shook his head. "Not yet, sir." The man smiled and handed him a bag. Inside was a sandwich, apple, and bottle of water. "Take care of yourself, okay?" It wasn't much, but it reminded Jordan that goodness still existed. Scattered. Fragile, but real. Later that day, while washing windshields near a traffic light, Jordan noticed a black car pulled over near the curb. A luxury sedan. Cleaner than anything he'd ever seen up close. He ran over, spray bottle ready, but stopped when he saw the driver. A middle-aged man with grey at his temples, staring blankly at the steering wheel. It was Richard Donovan. Jordan hesitated, then knocked gently on the glass. "Hey, mister, you good?" Richard looked up, eyes red from lack of sleep. "I'm fine," he muttered. "You don't look fine." Jordan grinned awkwardly. "You want me to clean your windshield? Won't charge you if you don't like it." Richard almost told him to leave. But something in the boy's voice, something warm and steady, made him nod. "Go ahead." As Jordan cleaned, he hummed softly. An old gospel tune his mother used to sing. The same one she'd hum when things got too hard to bear. The melody was faint, but it had weight, the kind that reaches past words. When he finished, he smiled through the window. "There you go, mister. Looks brand new." Richard reached into his pocket and pulled out a $50 bill. "Here, keep it." Jordan's eyes widened. "50? Nah, man, I can't take that. Please." Richard said quietly, "You earned it." Jordan hesitated, then took it carefully. "Thank you, sir. I hope whatever's making you sad gets better." Richard didn't answer. He just nodded and drove away. But that one sentence, "I hope whatever's making you sad gets better," echoed in his mind long after he left. Something about the boy's voice, unpolished, sincere, lingered. He didn't know why, but it felt like a thread pulling him somewhere. That night, back at the hospital, as Richard sat by Caleb's bedside, the faint hum of machines filled the room. Caleb's condition had worsened. Doctors had begun quietly preparing the family for the inevitable. Richard leaned forward, holding his son's hand. His mind replayed the day, the street kid's voice, his song, his smile despite having nothing. "Dad," Caleb whispered weakly, eyes half open. "I can hear something." "What is it, son?" "A song. Someone's singing. It's nice." Richard froze. A song. That same melody Jordan had hummed hours earlier in the city streets. He told himself it was coincidence. But a small, stubborn part of his heart, the part that used to believe in miracles, wondered if it wasn't. And somewhere, beneath that same Atlanta sky, Jordan hummed the same tune again before sleeping, unaware that his voice had already found its way into the heart of a dying boy miles away. There's a strange thing about life. It doesn't ask permission before weaving two strangers together, a billionaire in his tower and a street boy under a bridge. And sometimes one ends up saving the other in ways no one could predict. The night after their brief meeting at the traffic light, Richard Donovan couldn't sleep. He sat in the hospital corridor, elbows on his knees, watching the lights flicker along the sterile white walls. The doctors had tried another experimental treatment that afternoon, but Caleb's condition hadn't improved. His breathing was shallow, his heartbeat irregular. The billionaire's phone buzzed every few minutes. Business partners, board members, investors, all demanding his attention. But he didn't care. His empire could burn to the ground for all he cared. The only thing that mattered was the pale, fragile boy in that hospital bed. When he finally dozed off, he dreamed of that street boy song, that soft, wordless humming, echoing faintly in the hospital corridors. It was almost haunting. When he woke, tears were drying on his cheeks. He shook his head, angry with himself. What was wrong with me? He had men working on cures, doctors consulting globally. And yet, the only thing that brought him peace was a memory of a stranger's song. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Jordan woke to the morning sun and the sound of car horns above his bridge. His body ached, but his spirit didn't. He remembered the man from yesterday, the sad-eyed driver who gave him $50. Probably rich, he muttered, stuffing the bill into his pocket. Didn't look happy, though. He decided he'd use the money wisely. Maybe get a haircut, buy new shoes, something that made him look more normal. He walked to a thrift store downtown, picked up a clean hoodie, and spent the rest on a simple meal. As he ate, he overheard two nurses chatting at a nearby table. "They say the Donovan kid's still holding on," one said. "Barely. The father's a wreck. He hasn't left the hospital in days." "The billionaire guy?" "Yeah, I heard the boys at St. Joseph's." St. Joseph's. Jordan knew that hospital. He'd passed by it 100 times while walking between corners. He didn't know why, but something inside him pulled. Maybe curiosity, maybe empathy, maybe that quiet prayer he'd whispered days ago starting to bloom. That evening, he walked up to the hospital gates. Security stood at every entrance, dressed in dark suits. Reporters lined the sidewalks, shouting questions at every black car that came or went. It was chaos. Jordan kept his distance, watching from across the street. He didn't know what he was expecting. He just wanted to see the boy, to understand. A nurse came out with trash bags from the hospital kitchen, struggling to carry them. Without thinking, Jordan rushed over. "Let me help you, ma'am." She smiled gratefully. "Oh, thank you, sweetie. These bags are heavier than they look." As they talked, she asked, "You volunteering?" Yeah, Jordan lied quickly.
Just want to help, she chuckled.
Well, we can always use help. Come by the back kitchen tomorrow morning. Ask for Nurse Carla. You'll need gloves and don't expect pay, but there'll be food. Jordan grinned. Deal. He didn't realize it yet, but that small lie would soon place him inside the very hospital where Caleb Donovan lay fighting for his life. The next morning, Jordan showed up early. The staff was busy prepping meals for patients.
He worked quietly, scrubbing trays, washing vegetables, and carrying boxes. He didn't mind the labor. It felt good to belong somewhere, even for a few hours. By noon, he was exhausted.
He stepped into the hallway for air, and that's when he saw him. Through a glass window near the ICU, he saw a man sitting by a hospital bed, his back straight, his face buried in his hands.
Beside him, a boy lay still under layers of blankets, tubes, and machines. The beeping was steady but weak. Jordan's breath caught in his throat. That's him.
The man from the car, and the boy, that had to be Caleb. He didn't move for a long time, just watching quietly. There was so much pain in that room, a kind of pain he recognized, the kind you can't buy your way out of. Inside the room, Richard raised his head, sensing someone outside. He turned and caught a glimpse of a boy, the same boy from the street, standing in the hallway, eyes wide, hesitant. For a moment, he thought he was imagining things. He stepped out.
Hey, Richard said softly. What are you doing here?
Jordan swallowed hard. I'm helping in the kitchen. I just saw you. Richard studied him. The same ragged hoodie, the same tired but kind eyes. You again. He managed a faint smile. You work here now? Just helping out, Jordan said quickly.
Didn't mean to stare, Richard sighed.
It's fine. He looked back toward the room. My son's inside. He's not doing well. I heard, Jordan said quietly.
I'm sorry. There was a silence.
Then Jordan added, when my mom got sick, I used to sing to her.
Said it made her pain go quiet for a while. Maybe it'd help him too.
Richard blinked. Sing? Jordan shrugged. Can't hurt to try, right? Richard hesitated, then nodded slowly. Come in. Inside the room, the air smelled of antiseptic and medicine.
Jordan stood by the doorway, hands in his pockets.
Caleb lay motionless, eyes closed. Jordan sat gently on the edge of the chair, took a breath, and began to hum. The same simple gospel tune, low, gentle, full of heart. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And then something shifted. Caleb's fingers twitched.
His eyelids fluttered slightly.
Richard froze. Caleb?
He whispered. The boy's lips parted faintly.
Dad? Richard leaned forward. I'm here, son. I'm right here.
Caleb's gaze turned weakly toward the sound. That song.
I heard it. Before. Tears filled Richard's eyes.
Yes, buddy. You did. For the first time in days, Caleb's breathing steadied. The monitor's tone evened out.
It wasn't a miracle. The doctors would later say it was a momentary stabilization, a fluctuation in neural response.
But to Richard, it was something else.
It was hope. He turned to Jordan, voice trembling. Thank you. Jordan smiled softly. Guess music does help. After that day, Richard asked Jordan to visit again. The nurses were hesitant, but the boy's presence brought calm to Caleb's room. Every afternoon he'd come by, clean dishes in the kitchen,
then sit beside Caleb and hum, or talk about small things. School he never got to attend.
His mom, the stars he watched from under bridges. Caleb.
When conscious, listened quietly, smiling faintly. He liked hearing about the world outside his hospital walls.
You ever see the big fountain at Centennial Park?
He asked one day.
Jordan grinned. Seen it?
Man, I shower there sometimes. Caleb laughed weakly. The sound was like sunlight breaking through clouds. Even the nurses noticed the change.
Caleb's condition didn't suddenly reverse, but his energy lifted. He smiled more.
His vitals stabilized longer.
The doctors couldn't explain it, but Richard didn't need them to.
He began to realize this boy, this poor street kid, had done something no amount of money could. He had brought life back into a dying room.
And for the first time, the billionaire and the street kid shared something in common. A fragile thread of hope, stitched together by compassion. The days that followed blurred together like rain streaks on a window. Caleb would wake before sunrise, his body weak but his spirit restless. Every morning, Jordan would be there, sometimes sitting quietly in the corner, sometimes humming to himself, other times just watching the sunlight crawl up the hospital wall. The nurses had started noticing.
They would whisper among themselves, puzzled by the boy who came and went without ever signing in properly.
But Dr. Harris had given silent permission. She had seen something in Jordan too, something beyond rules or schedules.
Jordan had begun talking more now, not about his struggles, but about Caleb's dreams.
He would say things like, "When you get better, we can go downtown. I'll show you this spot under the bridge where the city looks like gold when the sun hits it." Caleb would smile weakly, imagining it even as his body fought against him.
"You really think I'll make it out of here?" Jordan's response was always the same, always calm. "You don't have to think. Just believe." There was power in those words, even if Caleb didn't understand it yet. Meanwhile, Richard Bennett was unraveling.
The billionaire, who once commanded boardrooms, now found himself pacing empty corridors, a prisoner of guilt. His son was dying, and no amount of money, influence, or private medical expertise could change that. He saw Jordan once through the glass, his son laughing weakly as the boy animatedly told some story with his hands. For a second, Richard didn't understand what he was feeling. Was it gratitude?
Or jealousy, that his son could smile at someone else when he couldn't even look his father in the eye anymore. That night, Richard asked Dr. Harris who the boy was. When she told him, Richard fell silent.
"A street kid,"
he repeated, his voice hollow.
"Yes," she said softly.
"But he's done something no doctor has managed to do."
"He's made your son want to live." Richard couldn't sleep after that. For years, he had built empires, crushed competition, and fed his ego until it consumed every trace of empathy.
Now the universe had sent him a teacher in the form of a boy who owned nothing but hope. One morning, Caleb woke up to find Jordan missing. He waited through the morning rounds, through lunch, through evening. No sign of the boy.
By nightfall, panic set in.
When Dr. Harris entered, Caleb's voice cracked. "Where's Jordan?"
"He wouldn't just leave. He promised me he'd be here." The doctor looked away, guilt flickering across her face. "Security found him fainted near the parking lot last night."
"He's fine now, just exhausted."
"He hadn't eaten in days." Caleb's heart twisted.
"Why didn't anyone tell me?"
"Because he didn't want you to know," she said softly.
"He said you needed your rest." For the first time, Caleb understood that Jordan's kindness came from pain.
The boy had given everything, even food, even sleep, for someone who still had everything to lose. That night, Caleb stared out of the window at the city lights and whispered a silent promise to himself.
If he made it through this, if he somehow lived past the week, he wouldn't just survive.
He would become someone worthy of the boy who believed in him. At that same hour, miles away, Jordan lay on a thin mattress in a crowded shelter.
He was coughing again, the cold from the streets clinging to his lungs. But even through the pain, he smiled, clutching the worn photo he had taken from Caleb's room, the one of him as a child on his father's shoulders.
"I'll see you tomorrow, man," he whispered to the night. "We're not done yet." And as the city slept, two souls, one born in wealth and one born in struggle, dreamed of a tomorrow neither was sure would come. The morning came soft and gray.
Atlanta's skyline shimmered behind a curtain of mist, and the city's heartbeat pulsed faintly through the hospital walls.
Inside room 412, Caleb Bennett sat upright for the first time in weeks. His chest no longer burned the way it once did. His breath, though still shallow, carried a rhythm of life he hadn't felt before. Dr. Harris noticed it before anyone else. The subtle change in his complexion. The way his eyes no longer carried that distant haze of surrender.
"Your body's responding," she said gently.
"It's remarkable." Caleb only smiled. "It's Jordan," he said softly. "He makes me forget I'm sick." But Jordan hadn't come that day. Nor the next. By the third morning, Caleb could barely focus. Every time the door opened, his eyes shot toward it, expecting that same crooked smile. That same voice that carried warmth into sterile air. Nothing. Finally, he asked the nurse where Jordan was. The nurse hesitated, biting her lip.
"He's at Grady Memorial. Came in with pneumonia."
"He doesn't have anyone listed as family, so he's alone." Caleb felt the room tilt. His heart monitor quickened, the machine beeping wildly as emotion coursed through him. "No," he whispered.
"No, he can't be." Dr. Harris came running, calming him down, her voice steady but urgent.
"Caleb, listen to me.
"You need to rest. You're improving, but your body isn't ready for this kind of stress." He turned to her, his voice cracking.
"Don't talk to me about rest. That kid gave me his strength."
"He was out there starving while I was lying here in sheets worth more than his life."
"He doesn't deserve to die like that." Dr. Harris didn't argue. She only placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Then live, Caleb. Live so you can help him." That night, Richard Bennett stood by the hospital window, his reflection blending with the city lights below. He'd just come from a board meeting, though he hadn't said a single word the entire time. His mind was on Jordan, the boy who had done more for his son than $1 million medical team ever could. He'd sent an assistant to track down Jordan's file.
The report was brief and heartbreaking. No parents, no legal guardian, no permanent address. A list of shelter stays, arrests for vagrancy,
Medical history, malnutrition, chronic asthma, untreated infections.
Richard's throat tightened as he read it.
All his life, he'd believed success came to those who earned it.
That poverty was a choice.
That people like Jordan were simply lazy or unworthy.
Now, looking at his son's slow but miraculous recovery, that belief shattered into dust.
He picked up the phone and called Dr. Harris. "Transfer my son's medical coverage," he said quietly.
"Every penny of it for that boy."
"Whatever he needs." Dr. Harris hesitated.
"Richard, I said do it," he snapped.
Then his voice broke, softer, trembling.
"He saved my son's life.
"The least I can do is try to save his." At Grady Memorial Hospital, Jordan lay on a narrow bed, breathing unevenly. The cough had gotten worse, each fit racking his fragile frame. Yet, even in the haze of fever, his thoughts were clear. He wasn't afraid of dying.
Not really.
He was afraid of leaving Caleb alone again. Of the boy slipping back into the darkness he'd pulled him from. When a nurse entered with new medication, Jordan asked weakly, "How's my friend doing?" "The one at Northside Hospital." The nurse smiled gently. "He's getting better every day. You'd be proud." Jordan smiled faintly, eyes glistening.
"Then it's worth it." 2 days later, a sleek black car pulled up outside Grady Memorial.
Richard Bennett stepped out, his suit immaculate, but his face haggard, lined with sleepless guilt. When he entered Jordan's room, the boy was awake but frail, a ghost of his former self. Jordan blinked at him, confused. "You're Caleb's dad." Richard nodded. "I am, and I'm here to thank you." Jordan gave a small smile.
"You don't have to. He's my friend." Richard's eyes filled with tears.
"You've done what no one else could. You gave my son hope when I couldn't even give him love." He took a deep breath, his voice shaking. "I failed him. I failed myself."
But I won't fail you. Jordan coughed, his voice barely a whisper. You didn't fail anyone. You just forgot how to see people. Those words pierced deeper than any accusation ever could. That evening, Richard returned to Caleb's room. For the first time, Caleb saw his father's eyes wet with tears.
Jordan's very sick, Richard said quietly. He
doesn't have much time if we don't do something. Caleb sat up, his breath sharp.
Then what are we waiting for?
Richard met his gaze. We're not waiting anymore. He made a single call. Within hours, specialists, equipment, and a private ambulance were arranged. Jordan was transferred under full care. His condition stabilized just in time. For the first time in his life, Richard Bennett used his power not to control, but to save. That night, as rain fell softly over Atlanta, Caleb whispered to himself, "Please, God,
don't take him from me. Not the one who taught me how to live." The monitors beeped quietly beside him, steady and strong. A heartbeat not just of survival, but of purpose. Because somewhere across the city, Jordan was fighting too. For days, the hospital became a battlefield of breath and heartbeat.
Machines hummed, monitors blinked, and nurses moved quietly, their faces carrying the weight of too many prayers unanswered. Jordan's condition had worsened before it began to turn.
His fever climbed dangerously high. His breathing was shallow and erratic, like a candle flickering against the wind. Every cough drew crimson on his lips.
Yet through it all, there was a strange peace in his expression, as if the pain itself had a purpose. Caleb watched from his own room, too weak to visit, but desperate for updates.
Every time Dr. Harris came in, he would ask the same question, his voice small and trembling. Is he still fighting?
She would nod gently.
Yes, Caleb. He's fighting harder than anyone I've ever seen. Then one evening, as the sun bled into the skyline and the city turned gold, Caleb stood for the first time without help. His body trembled, but his will didn't. He unhooked the IV lines, ignoring the alarms, and pushed himself down the hall.
Nurses called after him, but he didn't stop until he reached the ICU doors.
There behind the glass, he saw Jordan. Still, pale, connected to a dozen wires that beeped and blinked like fragile lifelines.
Caleb pressed his hand to the glass.
He whispered, "You can't leave me, man."
You said we'd see the city lights together. His voice cracked, raw with emotion. You promised me that, remember?
So don't you dare break it now. And then something remarkable happened.
Inside the room, Jordan's fingers twitched. A nurse gasped softly.
"He heard you," she said. That night, Richard sat in the quiet lounge, his head in his hands.
He had given away more money in the past week than he ever had in his life. But for the first time, he didn't feel loss. He felt small, human. Dr. Harris sat beside him.
"You know," she said quietly, "you raised a good son." Richard shook his head. "No, he raised me." She smiled sadly. "It's never too late to learn from your children." He looked at her, eyes tired. "And from a boy who had nothing."
I used to think wealth made me powerful. But Jordan, he gave more with empty hands than I ever did with full ones. As the days passed, both Caleb and Jordan began to heal, one physically, the other spiritually.
Caleb's strength returned faster than anyone predicted. His lungs cleared, his color came back, and soon he was walking the halls with the steadiness of someone reborn. But he refused to leave Jordan's side. Every morning, he would sit by his bed, reading old comic books, describing the world outside the hospital, telling stories of the future they would build together.
He would whisper things like, "When you get out of here,
I'm going to show you what real pancakes taste like. Not the kind from the shelter,
but the ones that melt in your mouth." Jordan would smile faintly, his eyes fluttering open just enough to say, "You better not burn them." It became their rhythm, Caleb talking, Jordan listening. the machines quietly keeping time like a metronome of hope. Then one morning, Jordan woke up fully. No fever, no haze, just the sunlight washing across his face like a silent blessing. Caleb was there, asleep in the chair beside him. Jordan reached out, weak but steady, and touched his friend's shoulder.
"Hey," he whispered.
"You look worse than me now." Caleb blinked awake, then froze, tears flooding instantly. "You're awake," he said, his voice breaking. "You're really awake." Jordan smiled softly. "Told you I'd see those lights." That evening, when Richard came to visit, he found the two boys laughing, Jordan propped up on pillows,
Caleb animatedly describing some wild plan to go downtown when they got out. For the first time in years, Richard felt warmth spread through his chest. Not from success, not from power, but from love. He cleared his throat, suddenly unsure how to speak. "Jordan," he began, "I don't expect you to forgive me for how the world's treated you.
But I want to help you, son.
Whatever you need, a home, school, anything, it's yours." Jordan looked at him for a long time, then smiled. "You can't buy people, Mr. Bennett, but you can believe in them. If you do that,
the rest will follow." Richard nodded slowly, humbled.
"Then I'll start there." That night, as the city glowed beneath a blanket of stars,
the three of them, the billionaire, the healed boy,
and the street kid, sat together by the hospital window, watching the world outside breathe. No titles.
No status, no fear.
Just life, fragile, beautiful, and shared. Caleb leaned back, whispering, "You saved me, Jordan!" Jordan shook his head.
"No, man, we saved each other." And for the first time in his life, Caleb believed it. It had been 6 weeks since the worst had passed.
Spring had come early to Atlanta that year. The kind of spring that made the air smell like new beginnings.
The magnolia trees near the hospital bloomed thick and white, and every morning sunlight poured through the wide glass windows, turning the halls golden. Jordan was walking now.
Slowly, carefully, but walking. His steps were unsteady, yet every one of them was a victory.
Nurses smiled when they saw him, the boy who had come in with nothing and left the hospital staff in tears of joy.
Caleb walked beside him most days, pushing the IV stand, or carrying a jacket when Jordan got cold.
They didn't talk much during those walks. They didn't need to. Their silence said everything. Gratitude, survival, and the quiet understanding that life had given them both a second chance. One afternoon, as they reached the hospital courtyard, Richard joined them. He looked different now, less sharp, more human. The weight of arrogance had lifted from his shoulders.
His designer suit still fit perfectly, but his eyes carried softness instead of steel. "Jordan," he said, smiling, "I was hoping you'd come with us today." "Where to?" the boy asked.
Richard glanced at Caleb. "You'll see." The car ride was quiet.
The city moved past them in flashes of color. Brick buildings, traffic lights, street vendors. When they finally stopped, Jordan looked out the window and froze. They were standing in front of a run-down neighborhood. Cracked sidewalks, flickering street lamps, the hum of forgotten lives. It was the same block where Jordan had slept for years. Richard stepped out first, then motioned for the boys to follow. Jordan looked around, confused. "Why here?"
Richard smiled faintly.
"Because this is where we begin." He gestured toward an empty lot at the end of the block.
Construction signs surrounded it. A new building stood halfway finished. Clean white walls, large windows, and a bright blue sign that read, "The Jordan Foundation. A home for hope." Jordan blinked, unable to breathe. "What is this?"
Richard stepped closer. "A shelter for kids like you, kids the world forgot to look after."
"You saved my son's life, Jordan."
"You reminded me that every soul deserves a chance." "Oh, this is your legacy." Jordan's lips trembled. "But Why name it after me? Because, Richard said quietly, you taught us what it means to live. Tears welled up in Jordan's eyes. His voice cracked when he whispered, I didn't do it alone. He turned to Caleb, who smiled and nodded. We did it together. Over the next months, the Jordan Foundation opened its doors. What began as a dream became a movement. Hundreds of children, some homeless, some orphaned, some just lost, found warmth, food, and education under its roof. Jordan worked there full-time. He didn't just manage it. He lived it. He spoke to the kids, told them his story, helped them find their footing. He never wore suits or fancy clothes. He still dressed in his old sneakers and hoodies, a reminder of where he'd come from. Caleb visited often, sometimes bringing his father, sometimes coming alone. His own recovery had turned into a mission too. He began volunteering at hospitals, telling his story to patients who had lost hope. He would stand before them, smile softly and say, I was given 1 week to live, but someone who had nothing gave me everything. One evening, near sunset, the three of them stood together outside the foundation. Children played in the courtyard, laughter filling the air. The city skyline shimmered beyond, glowing orange in the dusk. Caleb looked at Jordan and said, You ever think about how crazy this is? A year ago, we didn't even know each other. Jordan grinned. Yeah, guess life's got a funny way of proving you wrong. Richard laughed softly, his voice thick with emotion. I used to measure my worth in numbers, profits, deals, assets. Now, I measure it in faces like these. They stood there in silence for a long moment, watching the children play, the sound of laughter mingling with the soft wind. Jordan finally said, You know, I used to think I was cursed. Every night I'd look at the sky and wonder why I was born into pain. But now I get it. Caleb tilted his head. Get what? That sometimes, Jordan said, we go through darkness not to be punished, but to learn how to guide others out of it. That night, after everyone had gone home, Jordan stayed behind. He walked through the quiet halls of the foundation, past rows of beds, bookshelves, toys. He stopped by the front door, where a small plaque hung beneath the foundation's name. In honor of the boy who turned pain into purpose. Jordan touched it gently, his reflection faint in the polished metal. He whispered, We made it, Mama. Outside, the night was clear. The stars shone bright, the same ones he used to sleep under when he thought no one in the world cared he existed. Now those same stars looked different. Now they looked like home. By the time Jordan turned 20, the foundation had expanded across the state. Caleb had followed in his father's footsteps, not in business, but in compassion. Together, they built a life not of luxury, but of meaning. And every time people asked Caleb how he survived, when doctors said he wouldn't, he would smile and say, Because someone who had nothing gave me something money can't buy. Hope. 10 years had passed. Atlanta had changed, like all living cities do. New towers, new faces, and a rhythm that never slowed. But nestled between the rising skyline and the old neighborhoods still beating with history stood a building that time could not erase. The Jordan Foundation. Its walls were alive with color. Murals painted by the children who had grown up there. Words of hope covered every corner. Faith, strength, family, love. Every morning, the building came alive with laughter. Kids ran through the halls, counselors guided them, and volunteers, many of them once homeless children, now came back to help others. And at the heart of it all, a tall man in his late 20s stood by the gate, greeting each child by name. His eyes carried warmth and wisdom far beyond his years. His smile, though faintly scarred by memory, was pure light. It was Caleb Bennett. After years of study and public service, Caleb had chosen not to inherit his father's empire,
but to dedicate his life to the work Jordan started. He had become the new director of the foundation after Jordan's passing 2 years earlier. A passing that shook the entire city, but also ignited something beautiful in its wake. Jordan had gone peacefully, surrounded by family, not of blood, but of love. His body had always been fragile, but his spirit had carried enough strength for 100 lifetimes. The night before he passed, he told Caleb something that would echo in his heart forever. "Don't cry for me, man. Just keep the light going."
Promise me that. And Caleb had promised. Now every time he saw a child's eyes brighten, or heard laughter fill the courtyard,
he knew Jordan was still there. Not gone, just transformed. Richard Bennett, now grey-haired and slower in step, still visited often.
He'd long since retired from business, donating much of his fortune to build shelters and hospitals in Jordan's name. His presence was quieter now, but his heart had never been fuller.
He often sat on a bench outside the foundation, watching the children play.
Sometimes Caleb would join him, and they'd sit in silence, the way people do when words are too small for the moment. One afternoon, Richard said softly, "You know, when I first met Jordan, I thought I was saving him.
But the truth is,
he saved us." Caleb nodded, smiling faintly.
"He taught us what wealth really means." Richard's eyes glistened. "He taught me what living really means." Later that evening, Caleb went to his office.
On the wall hung a single framed photograph, one taken years ago in that hospital room.
It showed 3 faces: a frail boy with a spark in his eyes, another recovering in a hospital bed, and a man standing between them, trying to learn how to smile again.
Beneath it, a small plaque read, "The boy who had nothing, and gave the world everything." Caleb touched the frame gently. "I kept my promise, brother," he whispered. "Your light's still shining." Every year, on the anniversary of Jordan's passing, the foundation held a candlelight vigil. Children, families, and volunteers gathered in the courtyard, each holding a candle that flickered against the night sky.
Caleb would speak, but only briefly, because the night belonged to Jordan.
"This place," he would tell them, "isn't just brick and paint. It's a heartbeat.
It's proof that love doesn't need money to make miracles."
Jordan showed us that every act of kindness, no matter how small, can change a life, even save one. The crowd would bow their heads, candles glowing softly. Some cried.
Some smiled.
But all of them felt it, that quiet, invisible warmth that seemed to linger whenever his name was spoken. One winter night, long after everyone had gone home, Caleb stood outside alone.
Snow had started to fall, dusting the city in silver.
The world was silent, the kind of silence that felt like peace.
He looked up at the stars, the same ones Jordan used to talk about, the same ones they had once dreamed under.
And for a moment, he swore he could hear that familiar voice again. "Hey, man."
"Told you I'd see the lights with you." Caleb smiled through his tears.
"Yeah," he whispered, "you sure did." Years later, stories of the Jordan Foundation would spread beyond Atlanta, to other cities, other countries. It became more than just a shelter.
It became a symbol.
News outlets called it the miracle that money couldn't buy. Schools taught Jordan's story as a lesson in humanity. And every time a lost child found safety, every time a broken heart found faith again, his light burned brighter. Because that's what real miracles are.
Not lightning in the sky, not sudden wonders, but small, quiet acts of love that ripple through the world long after we're gone. And somewhere, beyond the stars, the boy who once slept cold and hungry beneath a bridge looked down and smiled, his heart finally home.